At 70, Kevin Costner reveals who he doesn't want at his final time. What if I told you Kevin Costner isn't thinking about applause anymore? At 70, when most stars cling to comfort and familiar faces, he's doing the opposite. He's cutting through the noise, facing the truth, and making one final, powerful decision. Not everyone who smiled for the cameras earned a place at the end. Not everyone who stood close stayed loyal. Costner finally reveals who he doesn't want near him in his final moments, and the reason hits harder than any role he ever played. This story isn't about dying. It's about choosing peace before the curtain falls. 10. John McTiernan. At 70, Kevin Costner's reflections include creative relationships that quietly fractured, and his connection with John McTiernan belongs in that category. McTiernan directed The Hunt for Red October, a film that helped shape Costner's early leading man image. At the time, both men were rising fast, each confident in his instincts and vision. On paper, the collaboration should have led to more work together. In reality, it marked the end of their professional alignment. During production, subtle but persistent creative tensions surfaced. Costner was becoming more involved in shaping his roles, paying close attention to character depth and tone. McTiernan, known for tight control and precision, preferred a director-led approach. Neither man was openly hostile, but the difference in working styles created friction that never fully settled. After the film's success, their paths separated. No follow-up projects materialized. No public explanations were given. In Hollywood, that kind of silence usually signals unresolved discomfort rather than mutual agreement. For Costner, this separation mattered because it happened at a turning point in his career when trust and collaboration were becoming essential. At this stage of life, Costner values clarity and peace over professional pride. John. McTiernan represents a reminder that even successful partnerships can leave behind unease when creative respect does not align. It is not bitterness that places this name on the list, but the absence of harmony. In his final time, Costner seeks calm connections, not memories of collaboration that quietly fell apart and never found closure. Before moving ahead, take a second to subscribe to the channel. If you enjoy real stories with depth, honesty, and respect, you will not want to miss what comes next. 9. Robert Duvall. At 70, Kevin Costner's reflections include quiet disappointments, and his strained dynamic with Robert Duvall fits that space. Their collaboration on Open Range brought together two respected figures who shared a love for the Western genre. On the surface, it looked like a perfect match. Both men valued authenticity, discipline, and old-school storytelling. Yet beneath that shared respect, tension slowly grew. The conflict was not loud or public. It lived in creative disagreements and opposing visions. Costner approached the film with a modern sense of control and structure, while Duvall leaned toward a traditional actor-centered style shaped by decades of experience. Neither was wrong, but neither was willing to bend far enough. Scenes were debated. Direction felt divided. The atmosphere cooled without ever boiling over. What made this situation painful for Costner was admiration. He had long respected Duvall as a legend of American cinema. Working beside someone you admire, only to feel distance instead of connection, leaves a lasting mark. There was no scandal, no betrayal, just a quiet realization that mutual respect does not always lead to harmony. As years passed, the relationship never evolved into friendship or continued collaboration. It simply froze in time. At this stage of life, Costner values peace and emotional clarity. Cold tension and unresolved creative friction have no place near the end. Robert Duvall represents a reminder that even respectful partnerships can leave behind emotional weight when expectations fall apart. 8. Christine Baumgartner. Among the people Kevin Costner would not want at his final time, Christine Baumgartner carries the deepest emotional weight. Their relationship was not a brief chapter. It was a long marriage built on family, shared life, and years of commitment. When it ended, it did not fade quietly. It unraveled publicly, painfully, and without closure. The divorce became a legal and emotional battlefield. Court filings, media coverage, and financial disputes turned private pain into a public spectacle. For Costner, this was not about money or headlines. It was about the breakdown of trust with someone who once knew him better than anyone else. The separation exposed wounds that never fully healed. At 70, reflection brings clarity. Costner has spoken through actions rather than words, stepping away from the noise and choosing privacy. The end of this marriage forced him to confront vulnerability at a time when most people seek stability. It was exhausting, not just emotionally, but spiritually. Christine Baumgartner represents a love that did not survive its final test. The memories are tied to loss, stress, and disappointment rather than comfort. In the quiet moments that matter most, Costner seeks calm, not unresolved conflict. That is why this chapter, despite its importance, is one he would not want present at the end of his journey. 7. Julia Roberts. Kevin Costner and Julia Roberts rose to fame along parallel paths, becoming two of the most recognizable stars of their era. From the outside, a collaboration between them felt inevitable. Studios planned projects, fans waited. Yet time passed, and nothing ever truly came together. What remained was absence rather than conflict. Unlike dramatic fallouts, this story is defined by silence. Several proposed films stalled or quietly disappeared. Scheduling conflicts, shifting priorities, and changing creative interests kept pulling them apart. No public arguments followed. No harsh words were exchanged. Still, repeated missed opportunities slowly shaped a sense of professional distance. For Costner, this pattern carried meaning. In Hollywood, repeated non-collaboration often speaks louder than rejection. It suggests hesitation, uncertainty, or a lack of belief that never needs to be stated openly. Over time, that quiet separation can feel personal, even when it is not intended that way. At 70, Costner looks back not with anger, but with acceptance. Julia Roberts represents a path that never aligned, despite promise and timing. The mystery of what could have been lingers without resolution. In the final moments of life, unfinished professional stories hold little comfort. What remains valuable are bonds that were fully formed, not those that stayed forever out of reach. 6. Kevin Reynolds. At 70, Kevin Costner's memories of Kevin Reynolds are tied to one of the most painful professional breakups of his career. Their partnership once felt unbreakable. Together, they created Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, a massive success that cemented Costner as a leading man and Reynolds as a trusted director. What followed should have been a long creative journey. Instead, it ended in bitterness. The turning point came during Waterworld. Pressure was extreme, budgets were rising, and expectations were crushing. Creative control became a battlefield. Costner, deeply invested in the film's survival, stepped in more aggressively. Reynolds felt sidelined and betrayed. What began as a collaboration slowly turned into resentment. Communication collapsed and trust evaporated. The fallout was public and permanent. Reynolds walked away before the film was finished. Costner was left to carry the project and the blame alone. Their friendship never recovered. Years of shared ambition dissolved into silence, with neither side willing to fully bridge the gap. For Costner, this loss cut deeper than studio conflicts. This was not just a colleague, it was someone he believed understood his vision. At this stage of life, unresolved personal betrayals weigh more heavily than failed projects. Kevin Reynolds represents a chapter where success came at the cost of friendship, A reminder that some creative bonds break beyond repair. 5. Whitney Houston's estate. Kevin Costner's connection to Whitney Houston was genuine and deeply emotional. During The Bodyguard, he supported her transition into acting, protected her on set, and believed fiercely in her talent. Their bond extended beyond the screen, built on respect and care rather than publicity. When Houston passed away, Costner delivered a heartfelt eulogy that reflected real grief. The fracture came later, after her death. Discussions around sequels, music rights, and creative direction brought Costner into conflict with Houston's estate representatives. What he saw as honoring her legacy was met with resistance and suspicion. Ideas were blocked. Intentions were questioned. Trust slowly unraveled. Costner felt his role was being rewritten, his loyalty misunderstood. The warmth of shared history was replaced by legal distance and guarded communication. For someone who values emotional honesty, this shift was painful. It turned a meaningful bond into a complicated and uncomfortable chapter. At 70, Costner separates the person from the institution. His respect for Whitney Houston remains untouched. What he would not want near his final time is the cold machinery that followed her passing. The estate represents misunderstanding, loss of trust, and the transformation of something heartfelt into something transactional. 4. Sean Penn. Kevin Costner and Sean Penn followed strikingly similar paths. Both became defining faces of their generation. Both were intense, driven, and fiercely independent. From the outside, mutual respect seemed inevitable. In reality, distance grew. Instead, their careers rose side by side, creating unspoken competition. Each commanded attention, each carried strong opinions, and neither softened easily. Over time, differences in political expression, public behavior, and personal style widened the gap. Penn embraced confrontation and visibility, while Costner leaned toward restraint and control. There was no single argument that pushed them apart. Instead, it was a slow, mutual avoidance. Invitations stopped, collaborations never formed. Respect existed, but connection did not. Costner reportedly grew uncomfortable with what he saw as performative emotion and public displays driven by ego rather than substance. At 70, Costner values authenticity and peace. Relationships built on tension and silent rivalry no longer hold meaning. Sean Penn represents a mirror of the path Costner chose not to take. The absence of harmony, even without open conflict, makes this a presence he would rather leave in the past, where it quietly belongs. 3. Cindy Silva. At 70, when Kevin Costner thinks about who he would not want at his final time, Cindy Silva represents a chapter filled with emotional weight and unfinished pain. She was not just his first wife. She was his college sweetheart, the woman who stood beside him before fame, money, and Hollywood pressure changed everything. Their relationship was built long before red carpets and headlines, which made its collapse even harder to accept. As Costner's career exploded, the demands of stardom slowly pulled them apart. Long absences, intense schedules, and constant public attention placed pressure on a marriage that was never designed for that level of exposure. When the divorce finally happened, it was described as deeply painful and financially devastating. More importantly, it marked the end of a shared dream that had once felt unbreakable. Unlike later relationships, there was no public bitterness or ongoing drama. What remained instead was distance. Their lives moved in separate directions, and no real emotional rebuilding followed. The bond that once defined his early adult life became a closed door. At this stage of reflection, Costner values peace over nostalgia. Cindy Silva represents a reminder of how ambition can quietly dismantle love. The memories carry sadness rather than comfort. In the final moments of life, he seeks calm, understanding, and closure. This chapter, though important, holds too much unresolved history to bring serenity at the end. 2. Taylor Sheridan. Taylor Sheridan played a major role in one of Kevin Costner's most powerful career revivals. Yellowstone reintroduced Costner to a new generation and restored his place as a commanding on-screen presence. At first, the partnership seemed strong, built on shared vision and mutual benefit. Over time, cracks began to show. The conflict centered on scheduling and creative priorities. As the series expanded, demands increased, and expectations shifted. Costner felt pulled in different directions, balancing his commitments while trying to protect his role and integrity. Sheridan, focused on the growing universe of the show, pushed forward with a pace that left little room for compromise. Media narratives soon took over. Reports framed the situation in simplified terms, often portraying Costner as difficult or unwilling. From his perspective, the story was incomplete and unfair. He believed his dedication was overlooked and his position misrepresented. What began as a collaboration slowly turned into frustration and disappointment. At 70, Costner looks back at this period with mixed emotions. Gratitude exists, but so does a sense of betrayal. Taylor Sheridan represents a modern Hollywood reality where success moves faster than loyalty. In the quiet moments that matter most, Costner chooses relationships rooted in trust, not public controversy. That makes this partnership one he would rather leave behind. 1. Madonna. Madonna stands at the top of the list for reasons tied to respect rather than rivalry. In the early 1990s, both she and Kevin Costner were at the height of global fame. Their paths crossed during her Blonde Ambition tour, a moment that should have been simple and forgettable. Instead, it became lasting. Backstage, Costner complimented the show straightforwardly and sincerely. What followed surprised him. Madonna later mocked his comment publicly in a documentary, turning a private interaction into entertainment. For Costner, this was not harmless humor. It felt dismissive and unnecessary. The impact reached deeper than pride. Costner was a father, and the public ridicule affected how his children perceived the situation. What could have ended as an awkward celebrity encounter became a lesson in how fame can erase basic courtesy. Respect, once lost, never returned. At 70, Costner does not dwell on the incident with anger. He views it as a clear line between different values. Madonna represents a world driven by shock and performance, while Costner values sincerity and restraint. In his final time, he seeks dignity, calm, and honesty. That moment made it clear she would never belong in that space. So now you know the truth Kevin Costner waited decades to face. Fame fades, money disappears. But the people around you at the very end say everything about the life you lived. Would you have the courage to make the same choice if it meant protecting your peace? If this story made you think, don't scroll away. Hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next hidden story Hollywood never wanted you to hear.